Welcome back to the Civilnet Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Elliott. I'm actually delighted to have a friend of the show and veteran commentator, Elliott and Hacopian. Eric, good to have you again.
It's a pleasure.
So we're now at the end of 2023. We're getting ready to wrap up, and we can't help but reflect on the past year. So if you can describe this year in one word, what would it be for you?
I think it's even with economy of words, I think one word isn't enough for this year. I would say it's a year of it's a year of change and a year of living disgracefully. I think the change is this is the year that Armenia actually switched sides politically. We went from a Russian aligned country to a Western aligned country. Most of it was done rather quietly, but actually very swiftly from where we were at the beginning of the year. So this is a country that's essentially changed its entire political orientation over a short period of time, which in the long term, if it's done successfully, will have much greater consequences, mostly positive for this country than not. But at the same time, it's also been a year of living disgracefully. This year, people were ethnically cleansed out of Artsakh. Armenians were. And we are probably the only people in Europe that you can do this to without any consequence. The people who did it did not suffer any consequence. They're dealt with as some respectable state still. And they did this criminal act, which is the highest form of crime under international law, without any consequence. And part of it is because of where we stand in the world and how little value we have. The response of our national government was a disgrace as far as washing his hands of Artsakh and the people there. The response of the Artsakh authorities was a disgrace, and that whatever the dog and pony show was that they put up with the changing of the presidencies. All of this was a disgrace. The international response, as far as when you look at it from the diaspora, I mean, you look at the Jewish and Arab diasporas, fighting it out over Gaza. And we had a much clearer case, and we couldn't make it. In fact, I was part of some of those efforts, so we failed disgracefully also. So overall, it is something. I'm not saying this to make people feel bad, but it's an inflection point of where you stand and what you need to do. First, you need to know how low you are, and then understand that everything that we do, anybody who's conscious in any way, even politically, in any way, has a sense of being. We have to make sure that what's happened over the last 3 years never repeats again. That's first. And secondly, that everything that's been done to us is over time avenged.
Yeah, I'm very, I would say I'm very Buddhist about these things, is that if it's outside of my control, I try not to be emotional about it. It's very difficult. It's definitely a watershed moment for any Armenian, but I like that you pointed out, right? We're all, you even called yourself out, right? At an individual level, we're responsible. And I think that's a good thing, in my opinion, because what we've lacked for so long is agency. We kept making excuses for our shortcomings. We have a very strong victim culture, but we haven't learned how to turn that and utilize that and turn it into a victor culture. And I refuse to be anything but optimistic for the future. I also think that we should learn to play the long game. Yazeri's waited 30 years. We have a long memory. We go back 3,000 years. We've outlived Julius Caesar. We'll outlive that bozo in Baku. But it is absolutely important that every single one of us take inventory and figure out what we can do to change and make things better. What lessons do you think we should take away from this? Where do we go from here? How do we begin to rebuild?
Well, I think obviously it's everything. The point of everything is the point of strength starts with economic growth, economic integration to the world. And this is actually, it's sort of missed in all the things that have been going on. This country has actually made we've turned the economic corner. And the reason I say this isn't, conjecture or my opinion. You actually have a record of this every year since 2017, which is the last year of the old regime before the revolution, except for the COVID year. We've had economic growth that's more than 5%.
Even during COVID year, we had growth.
Yeah, so it's like, and that happened before the Russians came, and it'll probably continue after Russians came. And I think part of that economic development has to do with really catch-up growth of things that we should have had over the last 20, 30 years that was held up by the corruption and the monopolization system that we have under the old regime. So everything starts with an economic base, because once that happens, it allows you, gives you the resources to build the competencies in other areas, specifically in state and defense and other things. But the key thing for this country is to make sure that the economic growth that we've enjoyed continues, because that is the ultimate game changer. And a good part of that is related to policies that we discussed, because that's not going to happen with, that can only happen with continued integration with the West economically, and not being dependent on Russia.
Absolutely. More than just the capability to defend ourselves, to purchase things that will defend us, but it gives us leverage on the international stage, right? When Saddam invaded Kuwait, a tiny, city-state essentially, you had the largest coalition since World War II go and liberate that country. You had 22 countries who showed up pretty much the next day because they had oil, not because anyone's particularly fond of the Kuwaitis, or not because anyone's favorite movies come from Kuwait. There's no cultural affinity to that place. And we're seeing such policies here. Again, I'm very much focusing on the positive as much as I can. But, you're seeing the diversification of our mining industry, or at least efforts in that direction. We're seeing the, focus on AI. We're trying to import supercomputers. We're trying to manufacture higher technology. And this is kind of the Taiwan strategy, right? Which is you make yourself indispensable to the world, so that when the day comes when you need help, and that day will come, you have to ensure that, as much as we love Serge Tankian and Kim Kardashian, them posting on Instagram, as helpful as it is, it's not enough. We need something tangible, right? On that note, let's talk a little bit actually about the military capabilities that Armenia is expanding. What's your assessment based on the last year? What are some positive trends that you see, and then let's balance it out. Give us some of the negatives, in your opinion.
Well, the positive trends that we see this year is actually all the stuff that was discussed about weapons purchases have come true, and are actually coming through, in the sense that they're actually being delivered over time, both French and Indian. So the country's military capacities are increasing. We know that there are reforms underway. We know that there's cooperation with the West. I mean, September, the 101st Airborne from the United States was here.
85th.
And, I'm sorry, the 82nd Airborne.
Yeah.
Sorry. Airborne was here doing training with our military. So a lot of this stuff is happening. However, none of it is happening fast enough. And the structure of the military, especially in the higher ranks, with really subpar people, or people that have allegiances to a certain other country, make reform processes way slower than they should be. And I think even though this government is actually interested in reform, I don't think they have prioritized it as the number one thing, and are willing to break the heads that are necessary to make it quicker. So I think it's a function of, yes, there's positive steps, and obviously I think that the gap between us and our enemies is closing, but it's not closing fast enough. And beyond that, I think the urgency, it's an issue of urgency. What we see is we don't see the urgency there. We see the changes, but not at the pace that we need to see them at.
No responsibility. I mean, the only civil servant that has publicly resigned over the 2020 war, nothing to say about the fall of Artsakh, was former defense minister Tonoyan. Granted, he's got corruption charges, there's this and that, but it doesn't change that he did the right thing. Objectively speaking, he behaved as a statesman. I haven't seen anybody else in Armenia do that. You still see the generals walking around. So from the positive development stuff that kind of slips through the cracks, we've signed an agreement with Czechia, which is a little bit different than the other agreements that we've been signing with, for example, we have Greece and Cyprus, right? And Greece is a NATO country. Every year we sign something. But the one with Czechia is very interesting because it includes the transfer of technologies. And Czechia being a NATO country, what that means is that, let's say, for example, that we need advanced systems from Germany or France, or, well, now soon to be Sweden, Finland, even the United States, Canada. We don't need to go and purchase it directly from them. We can actually get it as a third party through Czechia onto Armenia. That thing that we signed stipulates that, and that's kind of fallen through the cracks. But that's interesting. We've also signed some cooperation agreements with South Korea, and we're going to be opening an embassy there, and they're going to be opening an embassy here, and that's huge. Now, part of that agreement, this was more on the civilian side, but there is the sharing of technologies within that, and South Korea is positioning itself as a major, let's say, the equivalent of Turkey when it comes to advanced weapon systems.
It's actually much higher level.
Yeah, but you get the point. You're not talking cheap Chinese, and you're not talking out of reach, extremely expensive American. That middle ground, which is where the Bayraktars had been coming in. The South Koreans are positioning themselves to do that. And yes, of course, they have, they've denied, they had deals to send some stuff to the Turks. So even the Turks are trying to buy from them. But so the fact that we're expanding that cooperation, more than the tangibles of what it means, it also tells me that you finally have people at MOD who are starting to think outside the box, who are not just going either Russia or West. They're like, all right, let's look at what else is going on. First of all, what do you think? What can we predict this reaction from Russia is going to be? How hard is the slap going to come, and if so, when?
I think you sort of get a break while the Ukraine war is going on. It really depends on how that war ends. If that war ends soon, the slapback will be much quicker. If Russia wins that war, it'll be far more severe. If there's some kind of a cold peace that turns into the Cold War II, I think there'll be pushback. And then we've seen the pushback. I mean, the pushback is going to be economic. It's going to be economic and energy. Those are the 2 points that they can actually go after us on. And we will see it. It's just a function of externalities of where Russia is fitting in, as far as how strong it feels in the context of the world, and to what extent it wants to settle scores once the Ukraine war ends.
Some conservative estimates are saying that it'll take them about 10 years. If the war were to end today, it'll take them about 10 years to recover their previous military capabilities, and some more optimistic ones say 3 to 5. So that gives us a window, but again, given how slow things move in this country, it's not a huge one, to make some very serious changes that are going to protect us. But what can we do from an energetic standpoint? I mean, we're landlocked, we're stuck. Gazprom owns all of our infrastructure, including with Iran. Like the gas pipeline from Iran, it's a Gazprom one.
I think people, first and foremost, the assets are here. So if they really want to play the game of shutting down energy, you can always seize those assets. And you can seize it against debt, money that they owe us. So it isn't, the assets are here. So who owns it is actually, if it really comes to that, is of secondary importance. The fastest way to actually increase our energy independence is you need to start by redoing our grid, because we do have tremendous renewable capacities, but our old grid, which is owned by a Russian company that's owned by the Armenian brothers, the Karapetyan's from Russia.
That's Samvel Karapetyan, Tashir Samvel.
Yeah.
Great.
Those grids are not designed to take feeds from 10,000 points as far as when it comes to solar and other energy sources. So first and foremost, energy independence in Armenia starts by creating a new grid, and that's somewhere in the $600-700 million range, just to create a new grid so you can actually start feeding it from multiple sources. So energy is really, it's a 2 to 10 year project, but it starts with doing the grid, because that will allow you to very quickly amp up on our endless supply of renewables. And there's other things. There's biogas. There's a half a dozen different ways. But ultimately, the big one is going to be the next nuclear plant to replace Metsamor, which is likely to be Korean or American.
But they just signed a couple weeks ago to extend the lifespan. Is that us moving away?
That is specifically about Metsamor.
Okay. So the two aren't related.
They're not
still
related.
Order a new one.
And it's going to be next to impossible to order a new Russian one because of sanctions, because of the parts and extra things that you need. Yeah. So energy. Listen, there's tremendous energy vulnerability to Russia, but at the same time, since they own all the assets, they're also vulnerable because you can seize those assets. And there's alternatives, Iran, other things, but we're paying the price of 30 years of over-reliance on everything Russian.
Zero foresight.
Yes. So I think this is, but this is going to come to pass and this diversification is going to happen. But the diversification is best to happen from replacing foreign sources with local renewable sources.
Yeah. Speaking of Iran, actually, they just yesterday signed a free trade agreement with the customs union, the knockoff European Union that we have that we're a part of. What does that mean for Armenia? Is it good or bad?
Most likely, it's good because Iran is an overly protected market. It's really a closed. It's not an open economy.
Yeah.
So if you actually have rules that you can enter that market within the context of specific rules, it's actually going to help trade and our exporters to find a rather large, not very affluent market, but it's a significantly sized country. Yeah. So it's likely a good thing. But in the context of what the EU is, which is a whole bunch of nothing, I'm not sure how useful it will be.
Well, if it grants us greater access to their ports that can then go onward to India. Like for me, I'm worried about transit costs. That's pretty much, if you look at the way that the EU is. By the way, the European Union is like this too. The French wield a tremendous amount of influence, and like they'll push this legislation that is extremely protectionist for their own agricultural sector or protecting their wines. Of course, we have the famous story of them coming after Ararat to not be called cognac anymore, which is like if the German city of Hamburg sues McDonald's for selling him. It's a very French thing. So it's not like it's unique to this, but you do see that the way it's structured is extremely tilted towards Russia. Mm-hmm. So now we have another very large, very powerful country. My fear is that, on paper it's free trade, but how much free trade can you have with these dictatorships, these authoritarian countries? And you'll have yet another structure that's hindering us, but very much favorable to Iran.
I'm not. They don't have that kind of influence here, frankly. Economically, they've never had it, and I don't. I think that's not something I'd be worried about.
Let's talk also. I still want to touch up on the sovereignty issue with Russia. I mean, we have reliable sources that have told us that there have been instances where the European Union, the EU observers on the border, who are guided by Armenian military representatives. They don't just waltz around on their own, right? That when they go into dangerous spots, they have a detachment of Armenian military personnel with them. And you've had instances where they've driven up and FSB guards turned away our guys on our land, on our territory, in our country. You're having these instances, again, we have the recent case a week or two ago of Russian military police in Gyumri seizing a Russian citizen, which is completely illegal, putting him onto the base and then just transferring him over to Russia. And you're not hearing, there hasn't been a peep from the government so far. So, this issue of sovereignty, the Russians have shown repeatedly that they don't respect Armenia as a sovereign country. So, I mean, what's your interpretation of this kind of behavior, and how do we get out of that?
Well, you're asking the ultimate question. Russia, at this point, at this stage in its history and stage in our history, is an enemy of this country. It's actually aligned with our enemies. So here we have a situation where you have troops from an enemy country within ours. However, they're not Nigeria. You can't necessarily ask them to leave tomorrow without having significant consequences. So this is sort of a slow dance to slowly to creep back sovereignty as you slowly push them out. However, that's easier said than done. And I think, obviously, all of these, the two incidents that you outlined, are outrageous. And they're actually designed. They're not by accident. They're designed to humiliate us and to show that, that who's boss and they can do whatever they want. And this is some colony of Russia. So, but we're not the only country that's gone through this. And I think this is something where you need to have a steady but slow hand in reestablishing authority and showing who runs what where. But I wish I had simple, easy answers. I don't think there are simple, easy answers. I think it's a function of time and circumstance, and most importantly, political will. And for all of the failings of this government, and I always criticize them a lot, they've actually have made this, move away from Russia in significant ways. Yeah. In some ways, bold and brave ways that many other people would not have tried.
Well, like the famous Spasiba Bolshoi moment
when he drops the pen.
Yeah. So who are our real friends?
We have,
or who should be our real friends?
Well, first of all, we have to stop thinking in terms of friends. Countries don't have friends; they have interests, and they have alliances. As a country, we have enemies, east and west of us and north of us. Those three countries are our enemies, and their enemies, the sovereignty of, their existential enemies to Armenia and our sovereignty is Russia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. Then you have, the closest thing we have to a friend is France. They sort of help us like we're the dim-witted cousin who doesn't get it. And they have to help us, which they do, because they really don't have any particular national interests here. But they've gone out, they're the only country that's gone out of their way to help us when there was no reason to. The rest of the world is not neither our friends or our enemies, which is everyone from India to Iran to the United States. Because you can have different levels of relationships, but we should operate on the basis that we are our only friends, and that nobody cares about our existence except us, and that's the way it should be, because we don't really care about Nigeria's existence, so why should anyone care about ours? Yeah. So I think we need to stop thinking in these terms of who are friends and this and that. It's a question of what do you get out of a relationship, and how useful do you make yourself to the world?
Yeah, we need to kind of break out of this naivete, which you do see a lot in diaspora communities. Greece is our brother, and look, I love the Greeks, but they buy oil and gas from Azerbaijan. Serbia are Orthodox brothers, but really, Vučić, the president, just publicly stated, just as Aliyev, a great statesman, waited 30 years to take back Karabakh, so too will we prepare to take back Kosovo. I mean, we have to understand that everyone's out for their own interests, and on a national level, no one cares. So we have to give them a reason, and that's economic or military. That's pretty much the only two fists that we have to swing. We talked about economy. Let's go a little bit deeper. Do you believe that the growth is real? I could see a lot of the services, which to me is sustainable. I'm worried about the construction boom. You have all these condos springing up. I don't know who's going to buy them. From what I hear, it's the Russian Armenians essentially, who are trying to get a piece of the homeland. But how sustainable is this?
First of all, have you seen this country? You can do 50 years of construction in this country and you wouldn't be finished. I mean, most of our housing stock, most of our building stock was neglected for 30 years, 40 years. So we have many, many more years of construction to go before you actually get to that saturation point.
And finally demolish the ugly Soviet buildings in Yerevan. That would be fantastic.
That's a much, much more harder thing to do practically. Yeah. Actually, it's a myth that all of these places, all these condos are being bought by foreigners. There's some of that, but because of very specific government programs on tax incentives and things, there's a lot of younger people, younger families that are actually buying, not in the center of Yerevan, but in the outskirts, which are cheaper housing.
Davtashin is completely new Avan.
So I think that in those areas, there's a lot of people who are buying better quality, better stock housing now, who can afford it. So I don't, how sustainable it is. I think it's sustainable for multiple reasons. One of it that, again, we're seeing catch-up growth that we should have seen 20 years ago, and we probably have another 5-10 years of that. And as far as service sector, most economic growth in the world now is in the service sector, so that shouldn't come as a surprise. So I don't... the fundamentals are there. I think outside of a worldwide recession or another significant war, I don't see these economic trends really reversing themselves, and they've been quite strong via worldwide pandemics and wars. The fundamentals have not changed, and we've had in 3 years, we went from the poorest people in the Caucasus to the most affluent people in the Caucasus, and no one's even noticed. With
2 of our borders being shut, zero access to the sea, no natural resources to speak of. Imagine if we had a different position. No, I'm very impressed with a lot of the growth. And by the way, the numbers came out yesterday, the preliminary ones by end of year, so up until November, essentially, so 11 months. And economic growth this year is about 8.5%. Yeah, and we haven't closed out the year yet. These are still the preliminary numbers, and our central bank had projected 6.5%. So we even outgrew our own projections. So it's interesting that we're talking like 3 very significant years of growth. Let's switch gears here. Let's talk. The final topic I want to cover with you. What do you think is the likelihood of this much vaunted peace deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia? Is it likely to happen in the new year or not?
I don't care, to be honest. because I think we need to stop thinking of peace in the context of signed agreements.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, I mean, we hear the other day the Speaker of the Parliament is saying that they might want to sign a peace agreement without delimiting borders.
Yeah, that was
what is a peace deal without defining borders? Which is which just tells me exactly where they want to go, is to either not sign or to sign something that is irrelevant that they can violate.
Yeah.
So
it also keeps them on our territory.
Exactly.
By the way, the 200 square kilometers that they're occupying.
Yeah.
It's
so I think we need to stop thinking of peace as far as signed agreements.
Yeah.
Peace in Armenia is not going to be made by the foreign ministry. It doesn't matter how much I like or respect some of the people there. A peace in Armenia is going to be made by the defense ministry. You cannot have peace is essentially a win-win scenario. That's why people go for peace, even in the worst or harshest terms. States that have no future can't deal with win-win scenarios because there's nothing for them to win in the future. So peace for us will
Eric, qualify. Who is a state that has no future?
Azerbaijan.
Okay. Let's just put it on the record. You're not saying Armenia is a...
So what you have is peace. We will have peace when there's military equity, when there's,
it hurts them too much to bulldoze into our country.
And we will have security when we have military superiority. Yeah. That's the only scenario is through strength. There is nothing that's going to be signed on paper that, even if it is signed, is worth anything. So we need to stop thinking or just signing that or signing it. That's not what's going to bring peace. That's not the reason that we're not being attacked today. It's because of international pressure and the fact that our capabilities are increasing. Yeah. So the issue is to build up the coalition that you have of the world that's on your side, that you can get on your side. And it's about military capability. Stop thinking of these wishful scenarios about signing something with this regime whose whole existence is based on an existential issue with us. What incentive do they have to sign anything? And what incentive do they have to actually live by it? This is a state that just got away by committing the second Armenian genocide without any consequences. So what is it? What is a signed paper with them worth?
Thanks again, Eric. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.